Not a good moment to go on the record about government backing for his forces. Incredibly, he still turned up.
عليكم السلام. Commander, ازيك كيفك انت؟ الله يسلمك ان شاء الله انت طيب. This is Commander Mohammed Hamdan, the man we spent the last 2 weeks trying to meet.
Hamdan's men are accused of carrying out atrocities while allied to the government. Yet publicly, the powers in Khartoum have disowned them. He said he wanted to put the record straight. He said that in fact the government recruited him personally to fight against the Darfuri rebels in 2003 and made his men part of the armed forces. If we wanted proof, he said we should look around at his men's weapons.
And he said to me, does it seem logical to you that we magicked these weapons in these brand new cars out of air? Of course the government gave them to us.
He says his orders came straight from the top.
Commander Hamdan said that he met the president of Sudan, President Umar al-Bashir, in his home in September of 2006, where he personally asked him to carry out campaigns in Sidr and Kariari in northern Darfur that had recently been taken by the Darfuri rebels.
These are the first direct allegations by a senior Janjaweed leader that his force was armed and controlled by the Sudanese government. It's what the international community has long suspected. Next morning, I wanted to ask the commander about the crimes committed against civilians by Janjaweed and why the UN want him investigated for alleged war crimes.
When the world thinks of Darfur and they think of the Arab tribes in Darfur, they think of the rapes and the looting and the pillages. Are your men responsible for that?
Hamdan said he wasn't responsible for what others had done. His men had only fought insurgents. And when the government ordered him to carry out operations in civilian areas, he refused.
And he says that he is willing to put his hand on his heart and say that he is responsible for his men and he knows what his men did and didn't do, and they didn't commit atrocities.
He knows the world thinks his men are Janjaweed, but in his culture, a Janjaweed is a bandit who rapes and loots. His men were part of an organized force, therefore to call them Janjaweed is wrong. The men then produced what they said were army ID cards.
You can see in Arabic it says identity for officers and soldiers, armed forces, commission for intelligence and security, and there's actually an ID number.
They said all the men had cards like these, proving they were part of the government's forces. Hamdan said he'd welcome an investigation into his men's conduct. Hamdan wanted to show us that African villagers were still living close to the garrison, to reassure us that his men weren't murderers. After all, Janjaweed have burnt non-Arab settlements all across Darfur.
They're just taking us to a nearby fort village because I think show evidence of conciliation between Arab and non-Arab tribes. Commander Hamdan's talking to some of the village elders by the look of it. This is Ishaq Abdurrahman, he's the tribal sheikh here.
The sheikh said Arab bandits had attacked the village early in the conflict, but that Hamdan's forces stepped in to protect them.
So would you describe him as a friend? The sheikh says, when I say that he's my neighbor, I mean that he's my brother.
If the sheikh's sentiment was genuine, this scene doesn't fit with the accepted story of Darfur. Arabs and Africans seemingly living peacefully together. At the garrison, we saw something else totally unexpected.
This is a new intake. These soldiers came in after the group defected from the government. What's interesting is that this force is not all Arab. There are both Arab Darfuris and non-Arab Darfuris who previously were on very opposing sides of the fence, and they signed up to be a rebellion against the Sudanese government together.
Hamdan has already signed treaties with some African Darfuri rebel groups, his former enemies. He knows this will cause the government deep anxiety. There's no